Queens Public Library embraces the theme Pride, Not Prejudice as we celebrate the vibrant spectrum of the LGBTQ+ community. Join us this Pride Month for an empowering lineup of events, including author talks, films, pride crafts, and inclusive story times for families. At QPL, we believe in the power of diversity and acceptance, providing a welcoming space where everyone can find connection and community. Visit queenslib.org/Pride 2024 to learn more. Juneteenth commemorates the end of slavery in the United States. Join us in June as we celebrate this annual day of Jubilee all month long. Check out our reading lists and enjoy our in-person and virtual programs in honor of this important day in U.S. history. Learn more at queenslibrary.org. Summer is a time to read and explore together. Reading during the summer is not only fun, it's an important way for children to retain and improve their reading skills when they are not in school. Summer reading at QPL includes a wide range of resources and activities for kids and adults, including programs for all ages, curated book lists for all reading levels, and much more. For more information, visit summerreading.queenslibrary.org.
You didn't really often see photographs of the male nude from the 1930s.
He created magic with his camera.
George Pet Lyons isn't a household name.
He became the most important fashion photographer in New York. He became at the top of the game.
An artist who should be in the canon but is not.
He is creating a world that looks like the world of nobody else. Why did we lose track of George Platt Lyons?
George connected with the literary and art world in New York.
A circle of people who were central to the cultural life of their time.
George was famous for giving a lot of parties.
He was an extremely luxurious man.
He was able to get men who didn't want to remove their clothes to remove their clothes.
The nudes were an essential part of his work. They were the heart.
There is a lot of emotion. There's a lot of authentic sexual energy.
That was his art, and he wasn't able to practice it legally.
One could be jailed for this material.
It was illegal to put the work in an envelope and send it across state lines.
It was hot and dangerous stuff.
This is all the Platt Lyons prints.
His legacy was sleeping.
George Platt Lyons perhaps now is on the radar more than ever.
We see this world that's gone, that's lost, but we see it through George's eyes.
Hey everyone, I'm Taylor Purdie and welcome to Culture Connection. Culture Connection, if you've never joined us before, is curated by Daniel Zaleski, and it's now in its 11th year at the Queens Public Library. And for the last few years, we've gone digital. And so this is being shown not just in Queens, but all over the world. And we're proud to present talks with international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters in disciplines that include music, theater, author talks, and, like tonight, film. So without further ado, tonight we have kind of a crossover episode of books, of photography and cinema. We have acclaimed fashion designer Jeffrey Banks and Sam Shahid, the director of the new documentary Hidden Master, The Legacy of Jeffrey Platt Lyons. And the first thing I want to say is that normally when we have a filmmaker come in, you know, they're a little bit it further along from the opening of the film and into their filmmaking career. But this film launched maybe a month or two ago, and you were recently in theaters. You've just hit the net, and you're doing all kinds of great Pride Month festivals, and so you're kind of right in the middle of the release, and it's also your first film. So it's not normally the perspective we get to hang out with here. But your background is in artistic direction and creative directing. Is that right?
Yeah.
So can you just, I mean, I think when we get into what the film is about, it'll be very clear how you got to this particular story. But I'm very curious how you decided that now was the time to change genres.
Well, it's like the opening of the film. Stephen Haas says, his fantasy became a reality. And so the same thing with me. It's always been a fantasy to do a film. I love movies and art direction. All that was a dream for me, a fantasy. And I'm lucky enough that I've been able to make it a reality, as George did.
And so much of the film, and I want you two to get into this because he has been such a part, it sounds like, of both of your artistic lives. But it sounds like people kind of discover his incredible work in different roundabout ways. And I'm curious how you first came into contact with these photographs.
Well, Bruce Weber, who's a great friend and a great photographer, he gave me one Christmas years ago a photograph of George Pratt Lyons, and I loved it. And I said, "Who is this?" He said, "George Pratt Lyons." So I knew the name. Then Jack Woody was a publisher for 12 Tree Press, and he came out with books on Pratt Lyons. There were 3 volumes. One was a ballet, one's portrait, and one's just the photographs and all. And I bought the books, and I said, "Oh my God, this guy's unbelievable. The work is just great." But then, like time goes by, and around 2011, Rizzoli's called me and said, "Would you like to design a book called The Male Nude by George Pratt Lyons?" And I said, "Oh, you better believe I would love it." The photographs came to me over 2000 practically, and it was from the Kins Institute. And they'd never really been seen, except I think there was a little book done maybe years before that came to me, but it was a small book. Anyway, I saw these images and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I never seen anything like it. And I thought, oh my God, I love it. So we designed the book, and I told the head of the foundation, I want to do a film. Why doesn't people know this man? He deserves it, as I learned about him as I was editing and all. And they said to me, "Look, there's no footage of George." I said, "I don't care. I want to do this film. I'll make it work." And so we began. In 2011, the book came out. And I remember Bruce Weber called. I gave it to him for a Christmas present. He said, "Sam," and he's a big, huge collector of Pratt Lyons. He said, "I've never seen these images. They're unbelievable." But I didn't tell Bruce what I was thinking. So I just sort of like, okay, let me try. And so 2013, we began. And our first interview was Bernard Pearl. And we went out to his house. I think it was in Connecticut. I can't remember exactly. And for an hour, he was not so easy to get a hold of. He wasn't sure he really wanted to do it. And then I found out that he loved Bloody Marys. So I said, "Oh, God, have a Bloody Mary with you." So he invited us out. And he starts the whole day with a Bloody Mary. And it was great. But the whole time the first interview with him was all about himself. And I thought, wait a second. So we were trying to get him to like us so we could come back, basically. So we came back the second time. And I said, "Bernard, it's about George." Okay. So he started talking about George. And you saw the love that he had. And he told us a lot of things that, it was amazing. It was just amazing. He really loved George, and he talked about his life with him, as you see in the film. And I thought it was really interesting. He told us things that are not in the film, but there's a reason for it. I'll tell you in a second. But anyway, he talked about when he inherited George's photographs. George also left, before Bernard, to the Kins Institute, huge amount of negatives. and of male nudes, and he didn't like his fashion, as in the film talks about it. He destroyed all that. And celebrities, he only kept the ones he liked. He didn't love everybody. And so anyway, and then Bernard inherited prints that were in George's possession, with a few negatives and all. And so that's how Bernard became, owners of George's work. And then he ends up selling it through Robert Miller Gallery to a man named Fred Koch. We'll talk about that later, but anyway, Fred Koch bought the whole Bernard Purdon's collection. Anyway, in the conversation, Bernard told us about Sam Wagstaff and Robert Mapplethorpe came to see him. And they wanted to see George's work that he inherited. And so they chose 10 images, Bernard said, and they said, we put this aside, we'll be back to pick them up. But they didn't come back. So when I interviewed Philip Geffner, who's in the film, he wrote the book about Sam and Robert. And in it, he talks about Sam Wagstaff wanted Robert to be the star, not Platt Lyons. So therefore, he did not, own the same thing. Be blunt about it. But then I asked Dimitri, who's on the board of Mapplethorpe Foundation. Dimitri and George and Robert were just like this. They were really close. He did a lot of setups for him, everything. So I said, Dimitri, did Robert own any of the images? And his response was, well, he knew of it. That's, but that's all I know. He said he didn't own anything. And we discovered many years later that Sam Wagstaff and Robert did. And they donated them to the Getty Museum. And they were in a show. That's how we found out. And so that was it. But Bernard was he really loved George. He really did. He loved his work. And he was great to be talked to. He was very personal. And he was at ease. And then he died, well, in the film you'll see that he died soon after that.
Sam, one of the things that I loved about the film was that even though you never see George Platt Lyons speaking, his voice is throughout the film. I mean, between letters that are read and very intimate conversations that he had. And I just think it's so remarkable for a full-length film. You almost feel like George Platt Lyons is talking to you. And I think that's one of the real geniuses of this film, is that you have all these other people, you have their voices, people like Stephen Haas, who I've known since I was 17 and had no idea that he was involved with George Platt Lyons, archive. But you have these wonderful voices. And one of the things, as someone who collects fine photography and owns several George Platt Lyons, one of the things I love so much about this film is that I discovered so much that I did not know about him. You really did your detective homework in doing this. And you've talked about how long, I mean, this was like a 10-year process, really working on this film and bringing it to life. Talk about the obstacles to having this film come together.
We had to get a list of who was still living that knew George, and that wasn't so easy. And then we tried to find there's a model still living and we did a lot of research there. But it wasn't so easy to get all of them to speak. The 1 to 5, I think, or 6 of the film. They were very. I'm not sure. I'm important. I don't really think I want to talk about it. So it took time to convince them that, hey, listen, we got a film about George. It's great. You're so important. So by the time you make an appointment with them, it took like 6 months, sometimes 3 months, and it was really interesting. That was one of the obstacles, to just convincing them, and then to find other people that knew of George's work and that had, like this woman there is sort of a historian of the fashion world and George, and so in a way, I'm so glad it took 10 years, only because each year we gained more information, more about George's life, and people who were connected to it or knew about him or loved him, and the historians and museums and collectors and all. So by the time, and then the COVID happened, as you know, and that took 2 years out. But lucky enough, it gave me time to read from the Yale Library his letters. Their life was all on paper. They never, we don't know what he sounded like. We even asked his nephews in the film, and he said, he couldn't. That's one thing about death. You lose the sound of their voices, and so I didn't want. A lot of people came to me and said, "Oh, you really should have someone narrate it, or you should have someone playing George." I said, "No," and that's when I read the letters and I found these quotes, and it's unbelievable. I'd like to someday do a book on the letters, with images that will back them up, because it's really fascinating. Because they all corresponded with each other, and Monroe Wheeler, it was amazing, and all the people we discovered along the way, which we didn't know from the beginning, and not even Stephen Haas. I mean, we didn't know that this guy had the collection, was inherited it, that kind of thing, and and then to convince like David Zwirner Gallery, there's a big part where Jared's in the film, and he's so great in it, and he did the show called The Young and Evil, which was part of that whole circle,
right?
And so to get him to say yes, actually, the whole way how I got him was he said he collected the Abercrombie & Fitch catalogs that we did, and he's missing 2 of them. If I would find the 2 and give it to him, then he would agree to do the film.
I'll have to talk to you about that later. I'm missing a few copies.
Okay, good, great. We have them. Anyway, but the obstacles came later. It's really interesting here. George Platt Lyons II was the nephew, and he was so thrilled to do this film. I can't tell you. He even came to the studio and brought family albums and everything. He said, I'm so happy you're doing this. His wife, Jane, and the son, Josh, we never met. We went to see George at his house, and he gave us the interview. It was really great. But he passed away suddenly. No one expected it. He was a young man, basically. And he died, I think, within months after we filmed it, And the family itself did not want this film to happen.
Really?
And I didn't realize that. I mean, I couldn't believe it, to be honest with you. And so I had to fight for it, and say, look, this is a film that should be done. It's valuable, and it's important at this time. It really is to know this man. And I felt like, George wanted his legacy out there, and so many people follow George have been able to live what he wished for.
Right.
With that, he inspired them, and so I wanted this to happen for him. So I told the family, I said, listen, this is why I'm doing this film. It's a longer story. I'm not going to go into it because it's legality and all, but we finally got the rights to do the film. But it was not easy, believe me. It was not easy.
One of the other things that when I first discovered his work and first started to read a little bit about him and read the couple of books that were out there about him, because I always like to do a deep dive when I fall in love with, I become obsessed with, whether it's music or musicals or film or artists, was this incredible relationship with Glenn Westcott and Monroe Wheeler. And I read a biography of them. And what really struck me about your film is how you connected all the dots. I mean, George was like this social arbiter of his time. He knew Diana Vreeland, he knew, movie stars, he knew all these people, and all that is really present in the film in a big way. And it was like, Gertrude Stein, this one and that one, they're all interconnected. And talk about the discovery of all of that as you were working on the film.
Well, that's so interesting because it was a revelation. We were like, oh my God, did we know this? What is going on here? And to give you a good example, Don Bacardi, when we interviewed him, he had a show at the John Reed Gallery. And he was in New York. And I read about it real quickly. I saw he was have a show. So we got my team. Let me go back and tell you how the components of the people working on the film. I have an ad agency, do mostly fashion, art direction and all. So when I decided to do the film, I said to Matt Krause, who's the partner here in the company. And anyway, he's a creative director. I said, you love photography. You're going to be the cinematographer. I said to John McCullen, who's art director, is great talent, he's a painter. And I said, you're gonna do lighting and sound. And I said, Nando, you do production, okay? Let me just tell you right now, we got a team here. The one I didn't have was the editor, and I knew that was really important. Mm-hmm. So I called Gloss, works on retouching in films and everything else. And I said, do you have anyone you want to suggest to me, you know? And I didn't really tell him too much about the film, so he gave me 5 names. And we went through their reels. And this one came up, and he didn't really have done a film. He did a lot of few commercials. And he did this one gay film, just a real short subject. And I didn't know him. And I said, I'd like to meet this guy. There was something very sensitive and beautiful, sensual about his work. But he never did a film. So we met him. He's young. He's very young, in his 20s. And he never heard of Platt Lyons. But he said, can I see who he is? And I showed, he said, oh my God, I love your work. I love it. I want to know about this man. So I knew he was part of the team here. So I said, we're going to hire you. And so he also recommended the woman that wrote the score, the music. And he's from Dublin. And she is also, and she was great. I gave her, I never met her. We just Zoomed everything. But Connor he really, I have to tell you, he got the story. You know, that was so important. And of course, we gave an outline and we told what I was striving for, the purpose of this film. He did a great job, believe me. And my whole team did. With them, it wouldn't happen.
I think I told you at that first preview, at the end of it, how beautiful I thought the score was. I mean, it's an original score. The music really is riveting. It takes you from one place to the other. And it sort of reminds me of Max Steiner and that kind of thing from old Hollywood.
It's so funny. The music, and then I said, what kind of music do you want? And I talked to her on the phone. I said, you know, George loved opera. And his favorite piece he would play constantly was the duet from Pearl Fishers. He played that, and we'd heard about this. Actually, his nephew told us, and I think Bernard told us. So I said, okay, fine. So she's in Ireland, Dublin, and she was Zooming with me. Just, what do you like? I said, well, I want it to be a new sound in a way, but opera. I want some classical feel to it, especially the dance party scene. I said, my favorite was Malcolm McLaren. And I know you know who he is, Jeffrey. And I said to her, he's my inspiration here. And I'll send you a couple CDs of what I think is great about his work. And I want you to hear it and pick up on it, you know? And so she did, and she did an incredible job. And so that dance part, I was really inspired by Malcolm McLaren. And I always love this thing called Paris. Oh my God, I just go crazy. It's just wonderful. So she was great. And, you know, the whole team worked very smoothly. It wasn't like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, you know. They were all of us connected. And there wasn't conversation about certain things, but, you know, I said, no, I want to do it. One of the obstacles I had, though, you mentioned obstacles. I said, I showed it to Matt Tannhauer as a filmmaker, you know, and I showed him the rough cut. And he called me up because we knew each other. And he called me up. He said, "Oh, Sam, it's great. You know, I think you need to play on the Lavender Scare because it was just mentioned it. I did the other part of McCarthy and all. And I said, great. So he really gave me a place to find some footage, you know, to illustrate it. But then he said, where did you get the party scenes? I'm so jealous. I don't have that in my films. I love it. And then I showed it to another filmmaker. I'm not going to mention his name. He's a young guy. I don't love his films, but he's cool. And he saw it and he said, get rid of the sex scenes. I said, no. And then the Fred Koch estate comes over that. That's a whole other thing at the end. I'll talk about, well, what happened there was, so I said, no, I want those in there. He's a real person. I want to be honest with this film. And so when Fred Koch comes at the end of the years, I think 9 years we into the film or whatever it was, and Fred Koch died, and the executor we knew, he got permission to see it and all. So he showed it to the head of the foundation. Did not like it. Thought
Really?
the Ice Cube scene was disgusting. The sex scenes, get them out of there. I said, you don't own this film, it's mine.
Good for you.
So, I mean, and I said to our distributor, I'm not going to censor one thing out of this film. It's going to stay intact as it is. Because
the thing about the sex scenes or the talk of sex in the film, it's not prurient at all. It's just really describing what his life was like and what he was like, living at a time very openly, living his life the way he wanted to live his life, and not, I love, like, for example, where he talks about his parents after he goes to Europe and he meets Glenway and Gertrude Stein and Monroe, and he's very open about the fact he's in love with these two guys and he's loving life in Paris, and he's not about to change, even though his parents and his upbringing was very conservative. And that is so revolutionary for the early 1930s. I mean, it's just something that wasn't done.
And that was some of the most,
as an artist,
that was some of the most thrilling stuff as a viewer, because, I mean, yes, it wasn't talked about in the 30s. But it was fantastic to sit with them as they were talking about it today. One, because, like you're saying, even today, you had to tell somebody, like, oh, I'm not going to cut this. There was pushback even today. But to see these people as they are today, these people that have lived entire lives wanting to gossip with you about that fabulous horny summer they had in 1933, that was so human. And it's like you had managed to strip away so many of the trappings of polite society elements, that because they felt like they were just talking to you and your camera, it was an intimate conversation. But then when that's projected for us, the ability to capture that intimacy and then make it so public is thrilling, because it's something that is so rare to see, especially around, I mean, the Ice Cube scene is great, and everyone watch it so you can know what we're talking about. But the other moment that was thrilling, is the word for it, is, I think Werner is the name of one of the great talking heads in this.
Yes.
And you've got multiple interviews with him, and I feel like we really hang out with him. But there's a point where he's saying, like, oh, I think we really got on because we liked this book and this author, and also I had a huge penis, and I think he liked that about me too. And he's so straightforward and flirty and nonchalant that it's so rare to get to have that kind of hangout on the big screen.
It's interesting, especially the Ice Cube thing. I mean, it brings the house down. People go screaming, But what's so beautiful about it, that Bernard delivers it, and he was there. I didn't want someone just to talk about it; they heard it.
Right.
So when I got that on tape with Bernard, I didn't even realize it. And all of a sudden, he's talking about it. He was there, and that's what makes it so beautiful to me. Because the way he delivers it. It gives someone a memory. I mean,
he's an incredible character. Great. You could not cast that role better than that guy. And actually, that was something that I think we had both wanted to ask you about, because as the film progresses, at some point, how long were you actually making the film? Because there are some things where. How long were you making the film for?
10 years it took, but we weren't doing it 24 hours every day for 10 years. We'd come back.
But I guess, when did you start filming? When did you start interviewing?
2013. Bernard was the first person we interviewed.
And when was the last shoot?
The film ended 2023.
Wow.
January. I'm trying to remember. I just don't know. It was 2022. And that year is the last. But what's really amazing to me was that we'd already finished the film. And when we interviewed Don Bacardi in 2014, he said to us, "Oh, Christopher Isherwood, he came to New York to see George. And Christopher Isherwood is known to always carry a little Super 8 camera, a film camera, and he photographed all his friends. And so he said, I remember we saw George, and he said, we filmed him. And we went, what? He said, yes, we filmed him. And we said, oh my God, we were screaming. Oh, where is it? Where is it? He said, well, I donated everything to the Huntington Library in LA of Christopher. So immediately we're on the phone trying to find out who Huntington we could connect with. And COVID came at the same time. And so there was a delay, as you well know, and we couldn't reach anybody. Finally we did. And they looked in the files and the collection, and they saw a hard drive, but it was empty. And then they found another film that was all European personalities in it. So I thought, oh my God, Michael Shriver, who's in the film, who was executor of Bernard Perlin's estate, he's doing a book on Don Bacardi, and he sees Don. So I said, Michael, ask Don if did he really give it to Huntington Library, or is it in the house? So he checked the house, did everything you can imagine. It's not there. And Don says, I know that I gave it to the Huntington Library. So the film, we finished the film. We thought, okay, we'll never get it. It doesn't exist anymore, if it did exist. And I woke up in January that morning, and I remember the film Chris and Don. And it's a great film about he and Don Bacardi, Christopher Isherwood. And in that film is all these home movies that he did of Don, and also other people and all. So I came here to the agency, and I said to Matt, do you know that you don't know the film Chris and Don, but we need to find out who directed that film, because somewhere maybe she's seen it, something. So we finally got in touch with her. I did, and she said to me, yeah, I do remember barely. That's only a second. I think I did see it, but I don't know where it is now. That's years ago I did that movie, Chris and Don. I don't know where the hard drive is. So can you try to find it, please? And I told her how important it was. So I didn't hear from her for a few months, and finally I said, any luck? And she said, I've been too busy. But I promise you, I'll try to find it, the hard drive that she had, see if she can locate it. And 2 weeks later, I received this email from her, and there is this clip. And I said, Matt was here, it was at night. And I said, Matt, I'm not going to look at it. I'm too afraid it's not going to be good. I don't want to sit here alone and be disappointed. So I'm sending it over to you, and we'll sit together and open it. Well, I got to tell you, it's I've never been so happy in my life in 9 seconds as I did. You thought we won the lottery. We screamed. So she was so sweet, and she said, I'll give you the high res of it, and you can have it. I said, thank you. So that's the only known footage of him. So we showed Outfest at the film festival. Don Bacardi came to see the film, and he's the only one that was still living. And I'm very upset because all the other people who knew him and worked with George, I wish they could have seen the film. They died before it was finished. And Don Bacardi came to see it, and he wrote me a beautiful thank you, and just loved it.
I mean, it's such a striking way to end the film. And for context, for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, as Sam was saying, we never hear his voice, and eventually you start to realize that you're not seeing any footage of him. There are photographs, there are self-portraits, but the film essentially ends, and then right before the credits roll, this title card comes up that says this is the only known footage of him. And it's the great Super 8, and they're just hanging out in Times Square. It's him and Christopher Isherwood, the writer of the text of Cabaret. And it's 9 seconds, right? And it's that sort of these amazing shadows ghost element of it, that is all there is, that it is that short, that it's that grainy, and that somehow you found it is just it really kind of underscores this idea in the film, which is, where did the cultural sense of this legacy go? I mean, in the trailer they say he's someone who's missing from the canon but shouldn't be. And the fact that you took that long to find any footage of him is, I think, a great example. I want to show some of his photographs while we're talking, for anybody who needs some extra context of exactly the kind of fabulous visual mind we're talking about. And if you guys can walk us through some of these.
That's Paul Cadmus.
Who I got to meet we photographed Paul Cadmus out in Connecticut, I think in Weston, Connecticut, a few years.
With Bruce?
No, not with Bruce, with Tom Gilbert. Tom Gilbert.
Oh.
Him. And he said, Jeffrey, do you know who Paul Cadmus is? I said, of course I know who he is. And he said, well, I've become friends with him and I'd like to go do his portrait. And will you come with me? I said, absolutely. And so we got to meet him. It was great. It was great.
And is this in his main studio? What is the part on the right?
No. The photograph on the right is in George's studio.
Is in George's studio, yeah. Wow.
And that's the exact shot that was taken, and that's the photograph.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean that's something we were talking about just before the like, and as we show the next one, which we can go to, it'll make sense. But just so much of the chiaroscuro in this, there's just so much equipment needed, and imagining like what the 1920s version of pulling that much power was like. So I love seeing his studio there. This is one that gets talked a lot about in the film, and is just
the black model is a guy named John Leaphart, and he was introduced to George by a man named Sam Stewart, who was a big tattoo artist in Chicago, and was an artist, and he's well known as a tattoo artist, and he's great now. So he introduced this guy to George, and I read the letters about this. It's really interesting, and George was he was a little nervous. He wasn't sure, this is going to work out, whatever. And the person he put him with wasn't sure he could do it, let's put it that way. And so anyway, it happened. And George fell in love with him. And by reading one of the letters, they might have had sex at one point. I sort of got the feeling they did. Let me go back to the sex part. What's really interesting to me, all the people that we knew George, just so y'all know, when it came to the sex of George, only Bernard's the one who spoke about it and was very out there with it. The others were not. I would say to them, "Oh, so what was it like, sexually?" Oh, his photographs are beautiful. And okay. So then I thought to myself, when gay men get together, they talk about the guy's penis, they talk about his body. Oh my God, what a great ass he has! Oh, he's so beautiful. Yeah, blah blah blah. So I mentioned that to. George did albums, and he gave them to him and all. He said, he would send just all of his friends photographs and all. And they were just so beautiful. We just told him how great they were. But they never, ever, except Bernard, he's the only one that really speaks about the sexual activity of their relationships. And I'm sure, I think Jesse Yao had a relationship by one of the letters. And George did with this guy here, but he was nervous at first. And Sam Stewart, matter of fact, wrote in Village Voice about meeting George. And he said, he's the world's greatest photographer. But I couldn't fit Sam Stewart into the film because there was no really visual, physical connection.
Right.
All of that matter.
Right. There's another person that's briefly in the film, someone that I knew. And I knew Chuck Howard, exactly.
Yes.
Because Chuck Howard was a designer for Anne Klein. He ran the Anne design studio for many years. And then he opened a restaurant in the theater district. Again, it's so interesting in the film how interconnected, Stan knew Bernard Perlin. Stan knew Chuck Howard. Everybody knew everyone else. It's just incredible.
Jeffrey, did Chuck ever mention George?
He never mentioned George to me. But I remember doing my deep dig as I do when I started to collect photographs. Actually found nude pictures that George had done of Chuck online, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's Chuck Howard!"
This isn't Chuck though, is it?
No. Chuck was his last lover.
Right.
It's really interesting because Chuck was living, and we contacted him, but he would refuse. He refused. He didn't want any part of it. And John Cagado, John.
Yes.
He worked with him, and he said he never ever mentioned.
No, he never mentioned.
Never. Not at all. And yet the letters, George writes in his letters to Bernard, he was so upset when Chuck left him. And he wanted to be a fashion designer. And George was very encouraging, like, oh my God, you go for it, and he would help him out.
Right.
But we discovered, though, that Bernard had an affair with Chuck after he left George and Sam Wagstaff.
Huh.
And Sam's reason for going to see the Platt Lines, he wanted to see the Chuck Howard photographs. And in Fred Coates' collection, there are a couple albums of just George and Chuck all throughout, and Chuck also. George really loved him. He was heartbroken when he left him.
Yeah. We can go to the next photo, but there's something that I actually wanted to put some context into these, which is you were talking about it's in the that a bunch of them are at the Kinsey Institute, which is its own fascinating backstory. But there's a box of photographs that no one is allowed to open. So like we're seeing 5 here. You have who knows how many in the film, but there is still a secret missing chunk of photographs. Which I mean, I'd like to hear more about that. But also Gertrude Stein just popped up, so treasure trove.
Oh yes, and that's how it all began. She introduced him. I think Monroe Wheeler and Glenway Westcott, they all, connected there. And then he ran into Man Ray becomes part of the group there. And she was very important for George, to get, he wanted to be a writer, as you well know. And then he realized he didn't have that talent. So Monroe Wheeler and Glenway Westcott encouraged him to be a photographer, and see what happens. I was going to tell you something I can't remember. But anyway, so Gertrude played a big part in his life.
Did they keep in touch? Because I mean, the film pretty early on talks about her, but was that just like his early life?
It was his early beginning, and we have letters to her. I did quotes from it in the film, and she worshipped him. She thought he was great, But the letters only at the beginning of George. I think when he came back to New York and then started becoming a photographer, and then he photographed her, as you well know, and she was on the cover of Time magazine, and then so that really set him on his way to fame. But I don't know. There's no other letters at the beginning of their life.
I think we have one more photo.
It's Santa Reland.
Yeah.
She's the one in the film says he only one had a jukebox in his studio, but he photographed her for. We found another photograph I didn't use in the film for Harper's Bazaar, in the editor's letter, or not editor's letter. She had a column there, and photographed her.
Why don't you? I think it was called "Why Don't You?"
Yeah, why don't you? Now, what's really interesting here, when you see her picture, is that everyone talks about who knew George about his parties. He was known for great parties. That's how they all met each other, and they meet models and all this stuff. And we didn't have. There's no footage of no photographs at all of the parties, the real parties at all. We had the Coke Estate. The last day, we've gone for 3-4 days there, going through editing films, finding things that we didn't have from the Kinsey, but for the film and all. And all of a sudden, we discovered this contact sheet. And the contact sheet was someone had photographed the party, George's party, and then she's in it. That's why in the film. So I said to the editor, we got to find a way to get those in there. Okay. So when you see the film, you see the archival film of the dance, all of a sudden start
see that in the film. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's all these clips, and then Dana Reed's in like 2 or 3 of them.
Right.
He's at the party, and I was smoking a cigarette, I loved it.
You said it when her picture came up that she has a line in the film, it's a great line, which is essentially that George was the only photographer at that time that had a jukebox in his studio, which it sounds like a kitschy, fun idea. But when you think about it, I mean, kind of groundbreaking. Today, when you think about fashion photographers, and there's always music and fabulosity, and the idea that he was the first one to be like, what if we had tunes? Like, what are you into?
And how lucky we were to find photographs of the jukebox in the studio with the guy naked sitting on there. I mean, I have to tell you, it was listening to interviews and finding images that support it, it was we were very lucky.
So I wanna go to questions in a minute if they start coming in. But actually, yes. So I wanted to end with this is George, right?
Yeah, with his assistant. You know what's really interesting here? No shirt. You notice this? Because it's hot, whatever. But George also would photograph in the nude himself.
Do we think that was to make the models feel more comfortable, or just?
Well, it's actually the photograph I have of him. I gave one to Bruce for a present, and I don't remember the setup there. But the one I have, he's photographing Monroe Wheeler nude in the on a tree, and he's nude, both of them.
I mean, a book. This one's just incredible. I mean, it's the behind the scenes photo everybody wishes they had of themselves.
Yes.
And I mean, can you talk a little bit about the large format that he was so drawn to?
Well, I think John Stevens speaks about it in the film because of the quality, the detailing of it.
The detail.
You know, yes. And that's why
you had to do that. And I think also, you know, the studios weren't air conditioned the way they are today. And with the large lighting equipment in order to light the set, I would imagine, especially in the summertime, it was extremely hot, which is why not only George has no shirt, his assistant has no shirt either. You know, I think it was just, when you think about New York summers, you know, and being in a studio, possibly a studio where the windows are covered, you know, to keep the light out, I can imagine it's pretty scalding in there.
But I think George also loved, you know, the Man Ray picture, they took him naked on and he's lying there on the lawn naked on. Yeah. I think he loved doing that. I think he was
way. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. You know, and he was incredibly good looking.
And beautiful.
I'm sure he loved being told how good looking he was.
Sure.
So yeah, we're gonna start getting questions in a second, but now that we've seen those, do you have any imaginings of what's in this box? So correct me if I'm wrong, but when he sent his a large chunk of his estate to the Kinsey Institute, he mandated that a certain box never be opened outside of Kinsey and like one or two of his confidants. And so now everybody working there in the film is like, yeah, the box is right there and I'm not allowed to open it. Or, I found some new things. I thought they were from the box, but they weren't from the box. What do you think's in it? And do you think anyone's ever going to open it?
I don't think so. Only because the only person who could give permission to open that box is the son of the nephew. And he has no interest in this at all. And they will tell you at the Kinsey Institute, Rebecca, who curated and heads that department, that he has no interest in it, none whatsoever. So I think it'll probably remain sealed. And maybe it should. I think that's even more exciting to me, you know, what is in that box. But no, we wanted to see the box when we were there in Minneapolis when they did, we did the show, filmed the show and all of the exhibit for George Brett Lyons. And I said, can we see the box? And she said, I wish we could. I would love to show it to you, but we're in the move of transferring to a new building. So there was no way. I still would love to see it.
Even that,
I like to see how it's sealed.
Yeah, I mean, that when it wasn't in the film, that's what I was thinking. I was like, I want to see how it aged. I want to know what he put his hidden things in. But then also, of course, you know, the imagination's always better than the reality. So you probably got lucky again on that. So this is a question about so Philip Gefter is in the film, and Philip Gefter was just a guest on this. How did he end up in the film? Because I laughed out loud when I saw him. I thought, oh wow, what a small world of this kind of like our cultural discussion.
Well, I knew about the film. I mean, the book he wrote, Sam Wagstaff and Robert Mapplethorpe. So I thought, because you know that moment we were, you know, Mapplethorpe was the name kept surfacing. You know, George inspired him. He copied George, whatever. So I said, okay, I called Philip Gefter. And I said, we're doing this film. He said, okay, great. He came over to the studio here and we filmed him. I didn't realize I knew him, but I he interviewed me before quite a while ago on the Richard Avedon book. And so he reminded me. I said, okay, great. So that's how it came about, because of the book Sam Wagstaff and Robert Bingethorpe. And I have to say one thing. I purposely in the film, I did not want Robert or Herb, all these people mentioned at the beginning of the film. I didn't want to be George versus them. So I wanted to make sure that if that comes out, which it should, and it did, it'd be at the end and just slips in, because I didn't want to be like, okay, George versus, you know.
That was actually a very compelling part of the film when towards, like you're saying, towards the end, there's a moment of like, what has fashion photography become now, and his sort of striving with that. And it really added a great context for the sort of like arc of time, the 30 years or whatever of his career. And had time moved on, or had like pop cultural taste simplified, what would have happened if his viewpoint had become the mainstream? And kind of to that, I want to ask both of you if there is like, or one or two specific things from his work that you feel like has made it into your own like visual lives.
Well, I think one of the revelations to me was the amount of really innovative fashion photography that George did, most of which was destroyed. And, you know, such a wonderful device at the beginning of the film to see these pictures, you know, burning and then to come back to circle back to that later on, you know, towards the end of his life, when George, you know, consciously destroyed some of them, because I think, you know, some of those pictures were amazing, and some of them I certainly had never seen before. And kudos to you, Sam, for digging them up, you know, and I'm sure, you know, you had to go through old issues of magazines in order to.
Well, it's so funny. We asked Ivan Shaw at Vogue, send us anything you have in the archives of Platt Lines, because George photographed them. He sent 5 photographs. That's all they had.
Mm.
And I think also what's interesting at that time, this is, you know, George was so brave and gave us a great gift, let me tell you, because Horst, George Hooney, Clifford Coffin, they were all at the same time.
Right.
But they destroyed their male photographs. I mean, Horst had maybe, I've seen 2 or 3 of them, but they destroyed them. They want to be remembered for their fashion. And George said, no, I don't want to be remembered for that. And in some of the letters, he writes about the fashion, how he didn't feel that was really him, you know, because there were so many people involved in making that photograph. So he did, and he didn't always want to do it the way they always, you know, insisted on. But the fact that all the other ones right there at that same time, they destroyed they want to be remembered for fashion, and he did not.
Well, I think he probably also felt hurt that fashion had passed him by.
Yes, I'm sure.
After he went to California, you know, thought that was going to be his next big thing, and that didn't pan out the way he wanted it to. I think he felt really hurt that, you know, fashion being fashion, which is, you know, very ephemeral and very au courant.
Yeah.
They had moved on beyond him. I mean, it's interesting because kind of the same thing happened to George Hoyningen-Huene. He was the big star in Paris, you know, in the late 1920s, early 30s. And then to escape and Horst was his assistant / lover. And then they came to New York, and it was Horst who became the star at Vogue, and George Hoyningen-Huene was really forgotten, and he went to Hollywood and started working on films like A Star Is Born, you know, because he couldn't get arrested as a fashion photographer. So
that's actually a good way into what maybe has to be our last question. But this idea of fashion passing them by, kind of in everyone's career, there's all of these photographers had that kind of moment. But the question is, in the sort of like post their heyday period, what was the first like general awareness moment for George's work? Was it the 12 Tree Press Triad, or?
I'm just trying to remember. Robert Miller Gallery, did a big show on George's work, and I think that's how Bruce and everybody got involved, became aware of it. Right. And 12 Tree, Jack Woody was Lincoln Kirsten's lover at one time, and or Jason Yao also, who lived upstairs, and Jack inherited from Lincoln the Platt Lyons photographs. George, it's really interesting to me that all of his friends and all, they all had several photographs that George would give them. You know, it's only people that haven't got to see them. And when they died, they left it to someone else. And Jack Woody inherited, and then he did that book, those 3 books, from the collection he got from Lincoln Kirsten. Now, all the ballet photographs are in the New York Public Library.
Right.
Lincoln Kirsten donated. You know, one thing you said at the beginning of the film, and I want to say this: every festival we've gone to is like over 30 something, and the one question that comes up right away: why did we know this man? And I say that's why this film is happening. That's why.
Thank goodness. I have one final question for you, Sam. And
I love it.
It's a question when I did my first book, and the book was finished, and the publisher said, "What is your next book? What will your next book be?" And of course, at that point, 5 years making the first book, that was the last thing on my mind. But I'm asking you. I mean, you've talked about wanting to do a book about George with all of his letters, but what will your next film be?
Well, I'm working on it. There's a book I read, 2008. I loved it. It's a short little book. It's written by an author, a German author. And I love this book. And I tried to buy the rights to it. I did at one point. This was years ago. And, but it didn't pan out. It was real dicey, you know, the situation was. So I backed out of it. Now that I did this film, I want to do this film now. That's what I've been dreaming about. And it's a short little novel, and it's great. I mean, it's really, I love it. But I'm not allowed to say the name yet because we haven't gotten the rights yet.
Okay, all right.
You know, but I do want to do a feature film.
Good.
You know.
Well,
I leave the world. Then I can say to the world, "Lord, you can take me now." You know.
Well, it's like what Bernadette Peters' character says in Sunday in the Park with George. We want to see more of you. More.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I would love it, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
I would love it.
No.
Well, this one is, as of maybe 2 weeks ago, widely available. Wherever you get your movies,
Prime Video and
Amazon, iTunes, yeah, wherever you're renting your movies. I will say this is the kind of movie that I love to watch. This kind of film, like in the early afternoon, like with like brunch or breakfast. That like it's a great like
wow,
like setting your day on like on an artistic path. Kind of this is a great like Saturday morning breakfast kind of film for me.
That's
so that's my suggestion. That would kick off your New York Pride weekend correctly, in my opinion.
I have to say, I love seeing it in the theater with other people.
Oh yeah,
yes.
Well,
very beautiful and communal about being with lots of other people, men and women, and seeing this film. That experience was wonderful.
We have the festivals, we go to them. Not all of them, a lot of them, and I sit through the film every time.
Really?
Because I like to hear the audience, how they react to it.
This feels like a great audience.
I'm learning things every time I see the film.
Sure.
You know, how it all works together.
Sure.
But I like to see the audience reaction.
But so you, here in New York, you played at the Quad. You opened a couple months ago. And now do you have another festival? In New York?
Now our focus, no, not in New York. Because it's all the festivals here are over.
Yeah, no, you've opened now. Yeah.
Now we're going to Europe and we're looking for distributors there. We just landed a distributor. We signed with them, and they represent England, Ireland, Sweden, and Wales. And now we're looking for a distributor for other parts of the country. They work differently there. They do it territorially, you know. Yeah. So now we're looking at France and Germany. Okay. But I
think France will love this film. I mean, there's such.
I hope so.
In France, so I think they'll just eat it up.
We're opening in. We just won the best documentary in Barcelona.
Right.
Oh,
and
that's
now
great.
We're going to and we're going to Lisbon in second week in September, I think it is, for the film festival there, and it's being shown in Dublin and Belfast this weekend. in Dublin next week.
Fantastic.
Okay.
So, it's great.
Well,
I gotta tell you, it's great. It's great. It's fun.
Well, I hope New Yorkers rent it now if they missed it at the Quad.
Yeah, me too.
And if you guys are in New York and you're in the market for a movie theater movie, I'm going to be at the IFC Center all weekend for an Argentinian film that opens tonight called Chronicles of a Wandering Saint.
Wow, love the title.
It's a great title. It was just nominated for all of the best first things at the Spirit Awards. It's a young man named Tomas Gomez Bastillo's picture, and it would be if you're in the market for communal movie theater going, it has a lot in conversation with so much of what is in the George Platt story, the sort of making your own community and finding a way to find your people. So that might be a good tomorrow morning. Start with this and come down to IFC in the evening. Well, thank you guys so much for coming in. And I'm bummed that I missed it when it was at the Quad.
It was great.
Because that is one of my favorite New York theaters. I love that little place.
And it played for an extra week. It was so popular.
Yeah.
Extended it. So.
Actually, a friend of mine works there, and I think maybe I'd mentioned that we were doing this, and she was like, "Oh yeah, those." I think she was like, one of the things that we do, if a film gets extended, usually it's because the Q&As were so fun or so interesting. And so like you guys were saying, seeing this with the people and hearing the audience gasp at the ice, and that definitely makes sense for this playing at the Quad.
The other good laugh comes when Don McCarthy drops his pants. And he sweet talked me into, I just love it.
Okay. Well, we've just crossed our hour threshold. Is there anything else that we need to know? We know where to find the film. Anything else Jeffrey, any last thing I didn't know to ask?
No, I think all questions have been asked and answered, and I just encourage anybody who hasn't seen the film to see it, because it's a masterwork. It's a masterwork.
It is. It's an incredibly charming, hanging out with these people, discovering these people. And then, I mean, if it was just slides of the photos with the score, it would be enough.
There's one thing I have to say. Grace Condon saw it. She loved it. But she said something to me. She said, you don't need that 9 seconds at the end. I felt like when we saw him moving and talking through the whole film. And that was like, whoa. Says you don't really need it.
Well, it's what I said to you in the beginning. You feel like you've heard George's voice throughout the film without your having done it, because it's so beautifully done, and because it's so carefully wrought with people who knew him, with people who respected him, with people who are historians about his work. So you come away feeling like he was talking to you the whole time.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Well, I guess good evening, and go participate with the
Thank
the
you
work
so
of
much.
George
And I'm just so happy I did it with Jeffrey.
Yeah.
This has been great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.